Our next guest is one of my favorite writers. I have been following his work going back to the John Tortorella era when he was the Rangers beat writer from, I think it was 2011 to 2015 or 16. I think I consumed everything. Larry Brooks, Pat Leonard. I read everybody, all the dailies. And now he's been covering the New York Giants. So I want to bring in my good friend, Pat Leonard, who broke the big story on Friday of this search warrant somehow implicating Quentin Dunbar, Deandre Baker, and Quentin Dunbar's attorney in a potential or an alleged payoff scheme involving the bribery of witnesses. So welcome to Conduct Detrimental, Pat. It's a pleasure to have you. Question number one, how did you see through the forest of all the lawyers, BS going back, a month and a half, these two lawyers, Patrick Patel representing DeAndre Baker and Michael Grieco representing Dunbar, had been working the media in New York circles going back a month and a half, claiming that their clients were the victims of an extortion scheme. What did you see differently? Did you see anything differently? Or were you just trying to get to the heart of the matter instead of taking the lawyers' statements at face value?
Yes, I think the last part is you make a good point, Dan. Thanks for having me. I got John Tortorella bobblehead here over my shoulder, so the Rangers are always going to be in the picture somehow. But no, to answer your question, I think these attorneys, of course, have to do their jobs, and they have to try and defend their clients to the best of their ability. But I think more than anything, what I did was follow the case, the facts of the case. I followed what the initial search warrant and arrest warrant, I should say, stated about the case. And really from the jump, when Michael Grieco said that he had 4 alleged victims changing their stories essentially within 48 hours, that right away did not add up. Not to mention that they, at the time, have said to have only changed their stories on Dunbar. So there looked like there was some sort of split. Even the fact that Baker and Dunbar weren't represented by the same person, they turned themselves over at different times or in for arrest at different times. It was just an interesting start to the case. Not to mention that I think from the get-go, it looked like the case was stronger against Baker than it was against Dunbar. There were conflicting, testimonies from witnesses at the scene or the victims at the scene about whether Dunbar had a gun, for example. But all of that together, combined with, obviously, the accusations were serious and severe. So following any direction and lead that I could find was important. But also, there were a lot of things right from the jump, I think you would probably agree, that just didn't add up exactly. And it seemed like there was more to it. And so following all of that got me to where we are now.
Yeah, Dan and I have been saying it all along. So welcome to the club, Pat. But as a lawyer, I'm very experienced in knowing how to read court dockets. And in looking at the Broward County court docket for both Quentin Dunbar and DeAndre Baker, the words search warrant didn't appear as any of the docket entries. So could you explain to us and to our audience what led you to the existence of a search warrant? Evidently in most criminal cases there are search warrants, but there was an absence of any reference to that on the case docket. What led you to it?
Well, I think just following the idea that right away these gentlemen had recanted or allegedly recanted their statements, and also seeing the fact that the defense on both sides, both for Baker and Dunbar, appeared to be going after the victims, whether it was their credibility as far as arranging some sort of extortion scheme, or the fact that these were people that could not be relied upon to give an accurate representation of what happened there. But following the kind of that key existence of this apparent, signing of an affidavit that Grieco announced at the first court appearance. And then, of course, a search warrant, as you know, Dan, is not public record if it has not been executed. But once the search warrant is executed, then it becomes a part of the public record. And so obtaining that from the Broward County Clerk of Courts was due to the fact that the search warrant not only had been filed for the iCloud accounts of Baker and Dunbar, but as I saw when I received it, it had also been executed.
Before I let Dan jump in here, you mentioned the Broward County Clerk of Court. That doesn't strike me as the most obvious target of a public records request. I would be thinking in the first instance, the Miramar Police Department or the Broward State Attorney's Office. Why go to the court with a public records request rather than the law enforcement agency?
Well, essentially because the Broward County Clerk and also the State Attorney's Office really, as you know, are the center point, along with the Miramar Police Department in their investigation. Those are the center points of where this investigation is happening, but ultimately you get constantly referred back to the State Attorney's Office and to the Clerk of Courts for all records on the ongoing nature of the case. And so that is kind of the hub of the coverage of this investigation, and where anything material, as far as you know, we still await whether formal charges will be filed. And so similar to any information that would come publicly available, like the search warrant, we now await the formal filing of charges, and we won't be hearing that from the Miramar Police Department. We won't be hearing that even from the Clerk of Courts. We'll be hearing that from the State Attorney's Office. And so just knowing where this information has to come from and who's in charge of disseminating it. And but that's what I would say. That's kind of the hub of where all of my coverage and reporting comes back to every time.
So that's it's an interesting background how these stories are kind of broken. Now for the football fans listening, or just maybe the sports fans. I mean, Dan and I, in addition to being named Dan, we have a bad habit, each of us, of bringing up professional wrestling on this podcast at least once an episode. I'm just going to read you a headline: New York Post. Deandre Baker's lawyer guarantees dismissal of charges, quote, soon. That's May 18th, 2020. And this is from June 3rd. This is from Pro Football Talk. Deandre Baker's lawyer, quote, we have the case won. So I bring up professional wrestling. In the law, you don't really get guarantees like this, and you don't really have them for a reason. And as you kind of mentioned at the top, you kind of have to read with what a lawyer's saying with a grain of salt. You can't really just buy all these kind of guarantees, because that's not how cases are normally won in the media. You have to have evidence at the end of the day. So Dan and I were on a podcast not so long ago, pointing out again just kind of what you were hitting on. It is very strange within 48 hours for not just one witness to recant their story, but for 5 of them to do it. And for 5 of them to do it, maybe people are forgetting, in the midst of a pandemic when people aren't supposed to be outside. That seemed a little suspicious. Dan, did we say that? I feel like we did.
Yeah, I mean, the tell for me was when these recantation affidavits weren't seeing the light of day. These attorneys were doing the rounds with the New York Post, New York Star Ledger, maybe even the New York Daily News. If they had affidavits which cleared their clients word for word, Pat shaking his head no, I guess they didn't run the gauntlet at the Daily News, but I would think that they would have shown their whole cards and produced these affidavits to either Paul Schwartz or someone else. And as a reporter, it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Let me see the affidavits. Okay, they're privileged. You don't want to reveal them. Let me see them at least so I can corroborate what it is you're telling me. And when these overly verbose attorneys, Patrick Patel, Bradford Cohen, not so much Cohen, but Mike Grieco and Patrick Patel, they were not holding anything back except for the affidavits themselves.
They were also threatening to fight each other and to come up to Jersey and to fight each other. So another interesting wrestling similarity here. Well, the reason I bring it up, Pat, and I want, this is what I wanted to get your take on. I mean, at the end of the day, to Dan's point, we saw Instagram photos, we saw a Madden alibi, but we didn't see these affidavits. Pat, you were on top of this. Tell us again, just for those that aren't aware, what was in these affidavits, and if they maybe had some similarities between them.
Oh, the affidavits that they signed recanting, you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. So, well, in addition to it fishy that 5 people were recanting, they all signed the same affidavit. I mean, It was the same exact statement. It was prepared for them. At least that's how it read. That's how it was presented. And it essentially said that Dunbar did nothing, that he wasn't involved, that he didn't have a gun, that he did not participate in any robbery. And so, interesting, of course, that then this search warrant reveals that despite that was only related to recanting about Dunbar, that at least this implies or connects Deandre Baker to at least the overseen alleged payoff, in that he is texting Dominic Johnson, the witness, the same day and within an hour or so of when the payoff is happening, saying, "I'm taking out cash. How much should I take? I'm trying to get there ASAP." And I'm glad you brought up the attorneys too, and kind of the rounds they made, because one of the reasons why I think I was able to stay online with the facts of this case, and of course we still don't know how this is going to play out, but Patrick Patel has done most of the talking for Deandre Baker, but he is not the attorney of record in this case. Bradford Cohen is. And the most noteworthy thing that has come out of their camp is when Cohen said about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago that he had 2 independent witnesses testifying Baker did not have a gun and didn't rob anyone. Now, I don't know why he did not present that at the first hearing, right when he has an opportunity to lay it all out there and just exonerate his client. But that type of information from the attorney of record on the case that is saying he has witnesses who were eyewitnesses who can testify directly contradictory to what these alleged victims are saying happened, that is noteworthy. But a lot of what Patrick Patel has said are things that sound like accusations thrown back at parties that have accused Baker, but do not sound like anything that would hold up in court. It just sounds like a lot of talk. And again, that is what an attorney's job is to defend their client and to project their believed innocence, and here is why. But I think all of those rounds, that can become a lot of noise when it's not the attorney of record. And so, when Bradford Cohen speaks about Deandre Baker, you should listen, because and as you guys know, because he is going to be representing him if this goes to trial. And, but of course, noteworthy that Michael Grieco, after all of this, withdraws from this case and is no longer a part of this case. He sent me a message today. I think he sent it to some other people too, that he was essentially recusing himself to avoid any collateral damage that this distraction would have on the fight to prove Quentin Dunbar innocent. So that was the statement he provided. But of course, this probably will start to move fairly quickly from here. I'd be curious to see what you guys think would be maybe the next step, now that he has withdrawn himself from the case, and now that this is public information about this alleged payoff. What do you guys think is going to be the next step here?
Well, neither one of us are criminal defense attorneys. I'm thinking, what is the next step from the perspective of the National Football League? I mean, both of these players, irrespective of what happens in the criminal arena, are subject to the NFL personal conduct policy, and Commissioner Goodell is not obligated to await the conclusion of the criminal cases before conducting the league's own parallel investigation. What are you hearing about the prospect of either or both of Baker and Dunbar, one being placed on the commissioner's exempt list for unpaid leave right away, and then, ultimately, from a disciplinary perspective, what are they likely facing, both from their teams? Will they be on their rosters for much longer? And if so, are they likely ever going to see the field in 2020? I highly doubt it. I think they're headed straight to the exempt list unless these charges disappear.
Right. The NFL will only say that the matter remains under review. So they haven't provided an inkling, but you're right. I think we can draw our own conclusions from the fact that assuming this case is not thrown out anytime soon, and assuming charges are filed in some way, I know I can speak directly to Baker's situation. The Giants don't want him around until he has resolved his legal matters. And so even if he down the road is found not guilty, it would appear that this would be a long, drawn-out process. He does have a motion to travel that has been granted as of now, but that, of course, could be rescinded given new information that hasn't happened yet. But I talked to a few people the other day after breaking this story with the Giants who told me flat out that they would not expect DeAndre Baker to be on this roster much longer. And so that's coming from the Giants. And so you alluded to the NFL investigation, which of course is separate. And a lot of times these teams wait on what the league is going to determine and might even hide behind it, some would say. Let the NFL do that, and then they can wash their hands of any kind of discipline and just follow the rules. But here, I know, because I've talked to people in the Giants organization that they don't appear inclined necessarily to wait for what the NFL is going to determine. But I think you make a good point, is that if this doesn't go any defined direction imminently, then it would only make sense that they would be placed on the commissioner's exempt list. I can't speak exactly to how the Seahawks are going to proceed with Dunbar. I really am interested in what happens with him as well, because throughout my whole reporting process here, and throughout, you guys have read all the documentation in the public records, but the case has seemed, and the testimonies have seemed more consistent and stronger against Baker than against Dunbar. But now this new information seems to could throw Dunbar right back in the same boat with Baker. Of course, part of that was also that Baker, everybody said he had a gun and was holding people up at gunpoint, whereas Dunbar was just taking things from people. So.
Okay, but that's kind of an odd disconnect where there was stronger evidence of criminality against Baker, yet it was Dunbar's legal team that allegedly arranged the payoff.
Dan, none of this makes sense at this point. I mean,
Dan.
We can try to make sense of it. Nothing adds up.
Before Dan jumps in with probably a really insightful question, as they always are, but
it's going to be a great one, I promise.
You were alluding to the Giants possibly washing their hands with Baker if this continues, for much longer. Are you talking about, just placing him in sort of an abeyance, or are they going to outright waive him? I mean, they've invested significant draft capital. They moved up a couple of spots in last year's draft. They gave up, I think, overall 3 or 4 draft picks to basically solidify his rights, whereas the Seattle Seahawks have no prior history with Quentin Dunbar other than investing a 5th rounder in him during the offseason. How much is that going to play into the Giants' decision? And do you think that they will outright waive DeAndre Baker?
My personal opinion is they will. I think that they have I know they have a lot of information firsthand on how he conducts himself just in general, day in and day out. Last year, a lot of troubling bad habits as far as, not good study habits, loafing on the field, essentially acting like he was a superstar when he was a rookie who should try to have been learning from veterans. A lot of reasons why the Giants were troubled last season. I mean, he did get benched at one point late in the year for not chasing Demaryius Thomas, and then he was benched and coming in selectively against Chicago. The point I'm getting to is there should have been a fire under his butt already. There were plenty of reasons already without any of the legal issues. There were plenty of reasons for the Giants to be skeptical, concerned, to read him the riot act, which Pat Shurmur did last year in front of the team, and teammates did in front of the team. I hate to say it, but without knowing even the details of this case, when I was alerted to the fact that a Giant had gotten in legal trouble, his name popped up in my head before I found out it was him. And unfortunately, it was because he just proved day in and day out last year to make poor decisions. Not saying that means that I thought it would result in this type of alleged criminal activity, but certainly when you talk about not wanting to wash your hands of such a valuable asset, somebody that you drafted so high, and let's be honest, Dan, you bring that up because it'd be naive to think teams don't think of a 1st-round pick differently than they think of a 7th-round pick in a situation like this. That is completely obvious and how the world works. But the fact of the matter is the Giants, of course, have been deliberating. They do their own homework, and they're trying to, as everybody, including myself, is doing, trying to give DeAndre Baker the benefit of the doubt. But my opinion is this is going to result in them waiving. Yes.
So I guess a couple of things, and there's a lot of moving parts to this case. So I kind of want to tie up some loose ends, and any insight you can provide us on this would be helpful, especially with Baker. So, as you've pointed out, Baker had the more serious charges than Dunbar. Originally, these affidavits, all we knew. I mean, now we've at least know that they're cut and paste jobs, but they specifically contradicted. It's the four victims and one witness. They contradicted their versions as it pertained to Quentin Dunbar. So that was, this is the part that now we're getting into with Dunbar's attorney. Now, separately, and you've alluded to it, I'm looking at a June 23rd report when witnesses came forward to specifically dispute Deandre Baker's involvement in the armed robbery. So the quote was from these affidavits: Deandre Baker was near me, and he never pulled out and or pointed a firearm at anyone at the party. So is it your understanding that I believe there are two witnesses with respect to these subsequent affidavits? Those are different people than the five original statements?
Correct. You're correct. Those are different people, not only than the four alleged victims, but also different people from Dominic Johnson, the witness who was cited in the original arrest warrant. Yes. And you're bringing up a very important point here, which is when you talk about how this case will be tried and also how it's being deliberated right now with whether to file formal charges, this is the crux of the matter, is like you said, because these four alleged victims have recanted and allegedly been paid to do so, even though they then gave sworn testimony that, oh, well, that wasn't real, we got paid to say that. Now you have the defense attorneys able to say, well, what's credible here? Is this really credible testimony? And when you stack that up against testimony from two other independent witnesses who are now saying the direct opposite of what you originally told police, now you give the prosecution in the case, and the jury in the case, if it goes there, reason to really kind of pit these conflicting stories against each other. And now it doesn't sound as much as a slam dunk, so to speak, as you would think when you initially heard all of the testimonies and how they lined up so much, especially with Baker.
Yeah, the other point I wanted to bring up, just for those that have been following it, or haven't been following as close as Dan and myself, and obviously you, Pat, originally this Baker had what we were kind of having fun with, this Madden alibi. He couldn't have been involved in the armed robbery because he was playing Madden, and everyone knows when you're playing Madden, you can't also be committing armed robberies. I mean, that's just facts. At least at this point, I don't believe we have any corroboration of anyone that saw him playing Madden. Is that still correct on your end?
Well, no, what I was going to say about Madden is that initially his attorney brought up that he was playing Madden as a reason why he wasn't involved. But actually, if you look in the search warrant at Dominic Johnson's messages, he explains that they were playing Madden for money. And so it was not, I'm playing video games with my buddies in this other room innocuously while there's a robbery going on in the living room. This was one of the gambling elements at this party, is at least what the case's information shows. So, and not just at this party, but just at this kind of party where they're guys playing dice, guys playing cards, guys playing Madden, but playing for cash. And so that is not the harmless activity. I'm not, obviously people can gamble, whatever, but I'm just saying in the context of this case, even if at one point during this party he was playing Madden, you could actually connect it based on some of the facts in this case and based on what Dominic Johnson is saying to the fact that that was actually part of the gambling activity in which Baker allegedly, according to the initial arrest warrant, lost $70,000 2 nights prior, according to one of the alleged victims. And so if you tie that all together, that's where that idea that Madden is something that's not serious in this context, you can poke holes in that as well.
So I have one thing, then I want to turn it back over to Dan. So I think as it was originally reported, you hear the words gambling and you assume it's something like dice or maybe poker or any number of different elements. Is it your understanding that the gambling was also pertaining to actually just playing Madden? Is that your understanding, part of it?
Well, Dominic Johnson said, so this is the witness who oversaw the alleged payoff at Grieco's office. And in his Instagram.
He's a nightclub owner, local. I think it's important to just kind of play that. He's a guy that
Correct.
introduced apparently some of the victims to Dunbar and Baker as well.
Correct. And he was at the party, and he explains in these Instagram DMs to other people who are not disclosed in the document, but he's explaining to people how he got involved, what's happening, and it's all written down. And he mentions in those messages that he's involved because he actually mentions 3 NFL players. He uses the number 3, which is very interesting. Because we don't know of any third NFL player in this context, whether it's 2 nights prior or the night of. But he says that these guys were playing Madden for money, and that they were at a party where there were only supposed to be people who knew each other, and that would keep things safer. And so, he divulges all of this information. And the fact that there is gambling happening, and that I believe it was at a table where Baker supposedly stood up and had his gun pulled on one of the alleged victims, which leads you to believe, I'm pretty sure the initial arrest warrant said that it was a dice game. So the point is this: in the search warrant, Johnson's messaging puts these guys, this is why it doesn't just indicate an alleged payoff cover-up. The search warrant also appears to further implicate Baker and Dunbar in the alleged armed robbery by what he is describing happened that night.
Yeah, Pat, one other aspect of the search warrant that was featured in your exclusive story from Friday night was the existence of closed-circuit TV tapes appearing to show a few people in Michael Grieco's office and the payoff being arranged. Are those tapes going to come to light? Where are they from? What's the source of these closed-circuit tape? Are they security cameras? Is there another shoe that's about to drop here? Because as we've experienced in the world of the NFL, videotape don't lie, and the Ray Rice case from several years ago changed gears dramatically when there was a videotape of Ray Rice striking or dragging his wife inside that elevator. Have you seen those tapes, or have you requested access to those tapes?
Well, I think that the existence of those tapes, you would think it might be related to the fact that Grieco withdrew from the case so quickly, only because the existence of them makes this more than just a he said, she said. So this is not just the 4 victims telling police something, and then anyone who was allegedly involved saying, no, I wasn't, and it's just their word against theirs. I think the existence of this video kind of put this over the top. I don't know where exactly it came from. I know it came from a previous search warrant. Like, it was obtained through a previous search warrant based on how it's described, because there's no footage, at least as it's described in the search warrant, of the actual inside Michael Grieco's office, allegedly, where the money exchanges occurred, where the payoffs occurred. So that would lead you to believe it could be security footage of the building that his office is housed in, but I don't know that for sure. I just know it's closed-circuit TV.
Pat, based on what's described in the search warrant, who was physically present at the time the video camera, at the time the camera was filming this incident? Was Quentin Dunbar or any member of his immediate inner circle part of that tape? Was Dunbar, any of his colleagues involved? Who were the participants in this so-called meeting in Grieco's office?
So the video according to the search warrant, the video shows Grieco leave his office, take the elevator down to the lobby, and meet the 4 alleged victims in the case and Dominic Johnson, the witness. And they all return upstairs, up the elevator to Grieco's office. And within 10 minutes, Johnson, the witness, leaves and goes downstairs in the elevator and meets an unidentified individual who has a black bag, that as they are coming up the elevator, according to the search warrant, the video shows him opening the bag, showing the money inside the bag to Johnson. And then they get out of the elevator, and it says in the warrant, I believe, that it appears that they're talking, or that there may be an argument of some sort briefly, but then they all go into the office. And so there's nothing described in that search warrant of here's how the payoff occurred inside Michael Grieco's office. What it does say is that one of the alleged victims says that even though Grieco stepped out, according to the search warrant, of the office, that this gentleman was paid off, and that Grieco walked back in the office right as it was happening, and he said there was no way that he couldn't have seen it. One of the other guys testified that he was told, instructed, you didn't see what you thought you saw the other night. And so all of this, and the testimonies of the 4 alleged victims about how the alleged payoff went down, so their verbal testimonies, the search warrant describes how that matches up with the video footage that was then obtained. So anything that they describe about how it went and how it proceeded is confirmed and corroborated. And one other thing I should mention, I probably should have mentioned earlier in the context of how I got on the scent of all of this and where this case was going. The search warrant describes that at the night of the alleged incident, that Dominic Johnson, the witness, according to one of the alleged victims, Johnson hid a cell phone at the scene of one of the suspects from police. And so those types of accusations, and that being included in the search warrant, tells you that right from the get-go, that investigators and the prosecution, or the Broward State Attorney's Office, that when they're reviewing this information, that right from the jump, in addition to the recanting of these stories all at the same time and all of that we discussed, an element where an alleged victim is claiming that this witness is starting to cover something up, or claiming that he's covering things up, right from the get-go, it would appear sent the investigation on the scent of Dominic Johnson. That's at least the way that the search warrant reads.
Okay, Pat, one final question. I'd like to kind of bring in the human element here. As a reporter who's been covering the Giants for 5 years, you've developed a lot of relationships in that locker room. Has your reporting, or how do you think your reporting could potentially impact your relationship with other players in that locker room? Because 72 hours ago, pre-Pat Leonard story, Deandre Baker was, by all accounts, if you believe his lawyers, pretty close to, having these charges tossed out against him. And then you break this big story. And now not only are the Giants going to be without his services, and that will adversely impact the team's performance, they may even cut him. As a reporter who covers this team so closely and builds relationships in the locker room, how does something like this, potentially impact your dealings with other players and team management? Are they understanding of the way this process works, that you're doing your job, or is this potentially a very sensitive issue in your future dealings with certain members of the team, some of his friends maybe?
That's a good question. And that's something that is certainly a huge impact on my day-to-day job. But I think what I find, Dan, is that I think the people who get it. And so what I mean by that is, whether it's players or coaches or scouts or any sources or relationships you build, I think people understand that as a journalist who tries to be as objective as possible, that you have a job to do. And especially in this case, where there's a lot of sensitive information and a lot of serious accusations, I like to think that the relationships and the people that I've met and things I've built, that people know that my intentions as a reporter are in the right place. And also that, for every story that I do about a Deandre Baker status with the team and his case, there's another one on fullback Eli Penny leading a peaceful protest in Norwalk, California, in the face of police brutality in favor of, supporting that Black Lives Matter and police reform. And I think as long as you balance your coverage fairly and you cover it honestly, and I think people who are willing to give you a chance and who have a good head on their shoulders will respect that. But of course, I can't begrudge somebody if it frustrates them either that my reporting may lead to something negative for Deandre, because of course, like you said, they're friends. And so there will be people who feel that way. I would add this though, too. You bring up the human element. I don't want anything bad to happen to Deandre Baker or anybody. And, you know, when you report on a story like this, especially when evidence that may appear incriminating comes to light, I mean, the last thing you want is for someone to lose their job, to lose their career, to go to jail, etc. And so I really would emphasize this is about following the facts of a case. And that's what this is about. And this is about reporting. And, you know, I am not an attorney. I am not a police officer. I am not somebody who is going to adjudge whether Deandre Baker is worthy of continuing not only to play in the NFL, but also to, you know, be a free man. But what I can do is do my best to honestly connect the dots and to report on the facts. And so that's what I'm trying to do. But I don't begrudge anyone if they have a different idea of how I go about things.
Okay, well, before we let you go, that takes me into my bonus question. You're reporting the facts, yet Deandre Baker's attorney, Bradford Cohen, the day after your story appeared, or maybe he tweeted this, he put this on Twitter, he referred to your story, your fact-based story, as shameful reporting. I'm not so certain that you, you know, editorialized or did anything other than report the facts as they came to you through this search warrant and other evidence. What do you say to the accusation that this reporting was shoddy or shameful?
No, I think, listen, I think just like Bradford Cohen has two witnesses who said something that was the opposite of what the four alleged victims accused Deandre Baker of, I see that in the same vein. You know, I see it as he believes that Deandre did not do anything and does not deserve, you know, the attention to even the implication of incriminating evidence against him. And so he has a job to do. And part of that job is to stand up for Deandre. So, you know, I see that as his job. And it's not personal from me going to Deandre or to the case. So I don't take it personally coming the other way either.
So, Pat, we'll send you home. I was going to ask that. I was going to say, who do you want to dunk on now that you were right? But, you know, neither here nor there. So, Pat, thank you very much for coming on. Obviously, a very important story. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out that as attorneys, we are well aware, and as is anyone that's watched Law & Order, innocent until proven guilty. This story does not really change that burden of proof. Right. If anything, it was going probably a little bit better for Dunbar and Baker, and now, if anything, you're really close to the middle if you just throw those witnesses out or you take away those helpful affidavits. So, you know, much to be said here. This case is not won or lost overnight, and as we've seen, not won or lost in the media. So, with that being said, Pat, thank you so much for jumping on. We'd love to have you back as the story continues to progress. You got it. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat. And we'll let you go. Appreciate you spending so much time with us. Thanks again.
You got it. Take care.